Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Accelerating Affordable Smartphone Ownership in Emerging Markets. Thank you for joining us for today. My name is Hibak Ibrahim. I work in the GSMA Connected Society, and I'm your host for today. Before we get started, if you do have any technical issues, you can use the chat feature to let us know. Just so that you're aware, there is about a 20 seconds time lag, which is something you may notice, especially if you're joining the event on the phone. At the end of the event, we will have a question and answer session. Please, throughout the presentation, post your question in the question and answer box shown on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Madeleine Carlson, our presenter for today.
Thanks, Hibak. So, what we're going to present today is the results of a research project that our Connected Women and Connected Society program at GSMA conducted last year. And here we investigated how we can make smartphones more affordable, particularly in low and middle income countries. So to give a bit of background of what we did secondary research with stakeholder interviews in order to investigate the influences of the cost and affordability of smartphones. And we also conducted a global landscaping study where we analyzed about 30 business models for affordable smartphone ownership. And then we carried out qualitative research in 3 markets, in Kenya, Rwanda, and in India. And based on this, we could develop some case studies and consumer stories as well. The full research report is available online, and after the webinar, we'll also share a download link with everyone. So, today we're going to discuss the challenge of handset cost as a digital inclusion barrier, and then delve into the influences of smartphone affordability and the different business models for designing affordable handset schemes. And then we'll present a few case studies and round off with a set of recommendations, followed by a Q&A session for the remaining time that we'll have. So when we set out on our research project, we knew that handset cost is a barrier to mobile internet adoption and use. In our annual GSMA consumer survey, which spans over 20 plus low and middle income countries, we learned that among these consumers who are aware of the internet, the greatest barrier to using it are cost related. So these are 3 country examples here, India, Tanzania, and Colombia, where handset cost was cited by consumers as the main hurdle, both by men and by women. And it's a similar pattern for the other 20 countries of the survey, where for all adults, handset cost was one of the 2 top barriers for the majority of these. So why is handset cost such a big barrier? Especially when we know that smartphone prices have been falling quite recently, and in some markets you can access them for around $40 now. Well, even the cheapest internet-enabled phone can represent a significant cost. So if we continue with Tanzania and India as examples, we just saw on the previous slide that cost is a top barrier in these countries. In this pyramid here, it gives you an idea of how much low and middle income consumers could realistically afford to spend on devices. So whereas the middle income tier might only spend 2 to 3% of their income, the lowest income segment would spend up to 16% of their income. And this tier also represents, in Tanzania, 77% of the population. So this shows what big priority issue this in this country. So the next question would be, what's driving the cost of smartphones and people's ability to afford one? Well, on the supply side, multiple factors affect the total end user price. There are elements at play around the smartphone manufacturing, supply chains, marketing, and pricing decisions. And they all affect the final price that the consumer will pay. Concerning manufacturing, some of the core hardware components of the device can be quite hard to affect, such as the memory, the screen, the chipset, and the battery. So easy to influence are the software, packaging, and device customization. And these are all dependent on what software design, what features, and maybe what preloaded content that you believe are needed or would be most appropriate for a target market and consumers. Concerning the supply chains, the inbound and outbound chains can prove costly where import taxes and transport and warehousing costs are quite high. And depending on your chosen mode of handset distribution, in general, in emerging markets, the chains are a bit less structured, and it can be even more time-consuming and costly if you want to reach consumers in a more rural or peri-urban location. And then on top of this, we have the advertising and marketing costs, and importantly, the pricing step, where business decisions around price markups of premium brands and pricing by handset manufacturers play a large role. And in addition, we need to keep in mind that a lot of consumers in this market, they access devices also on the grey market and the black market. And this dynamic can really add a complexity when you want to design solutions, and it affects all these drivers and barriers that people face when they want to reach handsets. So on the demand side, we have a variety of elements that influence people's ability and willingness to pay for the phone. Beyond one's ability to pay, which is based on your income sources and your access to credit, the consumer's willingness to pay and the perceptions of the value of the phone and total costs involved are just as important. These two elements are interlinked and they can reinforce each other, where the level of relevance and need that a consumer attaches to the device and what their impression is of the device quality and the brand hugely impacts on the value perception of the phone. And another dimension to this is the gap between consumers' perception of and the actual reality of device prices. Because from other research, we know that consumers can have an exaggerated view of what smartphones actually cost. And if they never used the internet on a phone before, it's also common to overestimate the amount of money that you believe you would spend on mobile top-ups and internet services. So this all leads to a perception that such handsets are too costly to get and to use, and thereby out of reach, even in cases where consumers might in fact be able to afford them. And people's level of confidence in the smartphone and internet skills and how they are affected by status and social norms in the community is all influencing how willing or able you are to purchase the device. So all these three elements here, perhaps particularly the community influence and the safety aspects, are underpinned by the consumer context. So these are dependencies of your age, your gender, and where you live, and so forth, which all impact your willingness and ability to afford the phone. So now let's delve into the different approaches and business models that aim to address these drivers. Our landscape research revealed how existing business models can be categorized into three main types. And of course, there might be other types out there that we just didn't find. So if you know of any, please let us know. We'll be quite interested in this. But our first archetype we found is around third-party payment models. So this is where the smartphone cost is subsidized or offset by a third party, which can be the government, non-profits, or private companies. And these type of schemes are actually quite few and far in between. And most examples are where governments want to do a push to advance the digital readiness in their countries. And the aim would be to minimize or completely remove the price paid by the consumer. Our second archetype is asset financing models. And here smartphones are made more affordable while spreading the total cost over time rather than in one lump sum. And this can be financing options by MNOs, financial institutions, or alternative credit providers. And finally, a third category is direct payment models, where you make lower price smartphones available by pushing down the cost concerning the device supply chains and distribution, and by creating device subsidies. And as we see more opportunities for mobile operator involvement and potential for commercial sustainability in the asset financing and direct payment type of models, we will focus mainly on these two now for the remaining of the webinar. However, there's much more extensive information and examples also of the third-party payment model in the report. You can go there and read if you're more interested in that, or we can address it in the Q&A session at the end as well. So for asset financing models, they offer the option for consumers to buy smartphones via loans or savings schemes. So here the provider will lower or eliminate the upfront cost of the smartphone by offering financing options to split the total price paid in smaller amounts. And the consumer is able to purchase the device through regular installment payments. So this can be either via a loan, where they will receive the device upfront and they pay it off, usually in 6 to 36 months, or through a savings scheme, where the consumer is facilitated to regularly put away an affordable amount. And when they have saved up enough, they can receive the smartphone. So that the provider can mainly take two approaches here. We see smartphone financing schemes by financial institutions and mobile operators, where they assess customers' creditworthiness based on a credit profile of existing customers, which they have built up through previous transactions and product purchases. So for instance, this can be a bank that are letting existing account holders who normally can't afford the upfront cost of a smartphone apply for a smartphone loan in partnership with a mobile operator. But to help also lower income and unbanked populations take out loans for smartphones, providers are also increasingly taking a second route with alternative approaches to credit scoring. And these alternative assessments rely on information which isn't traditionally used by financial service providers. It can, for instance, be customer data of your location, your income, demographics, and social network data. Or you can access it through informal financial institutions, such as savings groups. So in summary, if you look overall on the key benefits, both for the vendor and the consumer, with this type of business model, it provides access to finance for those who can't afford the upfront device cost. And alternative credit approaches are particularly important here, because they expand access also to traditionally excluded groups. And the provider, of course, can benefit from an interest rate that's charged for the smartphone loan. Plus, it can also address ongoing costs of using the device, as these type of scheme often comes bundled with some data and airtime allowances. But then, of course, as with any credit initiative, we need to keep in mind that there's always the risk that customers can default on their payments, and there might be challenges of insufficient credit history. And if possible, of course, that consumers might still struggle to afford the total device cost. So here we have a few examples of schemes that have used asset financing models. I will call out one example here, FNB Connect. So this is where the South African First National Bank, together with the mobile operator Cell C, provided loans for both high-end smartphones and also later the self-branded smartphones. And the loan was over about a 2-year period. One of the lower-end devices, called A1, cost around $4.50 a month, and this came bundled with 50 minutes of airtime and also 50 megabytes of mobile data for the consumer to use. Now let's go into our second archetype. So direct payment business models leverage supply-side strategies to offer lower-cost devices. Providers here have been able to lower the upfront device price by driving down the supply cost, and consumers use their own income to purchase either new or second-hand devices. So here the provider can mainly take 3 different approaches. They can offer subsidized devices, for example, where the provider lock in the customer as part of a data and free content bundled plan and recoup marginal costs through ongoing data and services sales. Or they can offer, for example, consumers to trade in their current handsets for higher-end smartphones and get a discount on the rate. A second route would be to put in efforts to optimize the supply chains. And here, the mobile operators address inefficiencies across the chain. So instead of procuring from branded device companies and selling them through retailers, they can, for instance, do direct sourcing to cut out any middlemen and partner directly with the manufacturers to create self-branded handsets. And in this way, they can avoid royalty fees, and they can also tailor the device with main features relevant to the target users. Another route is to focus on more creative distribution approaches. And here the goal is to extend the footprint in a more cost-efficient manner. So here they can, for example, partner with well-established retailers like maybe e-commerce players, or work with rural agent networks to reach more remote customers. Looking overall on these models, on the key benefits of the vendor and the consumer, and the key benefit is that the consumer's cost threshold of the handset is lowered, and is offered as part of a bundle. It can also address any ongoing data costs. And if the provider has chosen to use a network of agents as a distribution strategy, there's also an opportunity to leverage this point of sale to help increase customers' know-how and internet awareness, which in turn also can enhance consumers' value perception of the device. But on the downside, this model still requires a customer to pay the upfront device price in a lump sum, which for some can be out of reach if you're lower income. So in these examples here, we see that providers have been able to offer smartphones at around the US $40 mark through different direct payment models. For example, we have Safaricom. They launched a self-branded handset called the Neon at about $38 in Kenya. And this was a 3G phone. They came bundled with 200 megabytes of data and 20 daily SMS for 30 days. And also, interestingly, customers could use their Safaricom Bonga loyalty points earned through their M-Pesa mobile money transactions. And when they did this, they'd receive a discount on purchasing the new handset from Safaricom stores. So now let's delve into 3 case studies where stakeholders have applied these type of models. So first case study is from Kenya. Copia here sell smartphones via catalog and agents to rural and peri-urban populations. And Copia is an e-commerce platform. And because of their agents network, they're very efficient in providing affordable goods to consumers in rural areas. So if we wanted to describe the Copia customer journey, basically the customer will learn about Copia from the local kiosk or M-Pesa outlet where a Copia sales agent is working. And they will then introduce the customer to the Copia catalog, which they can see either in the shop or on a mobile app. And here the customer can make a selection of which device they want. And they have brands such as Tecno, Samsung, and Huawei, but also operators of Airtel and Safaricom have their own branded cell phones to sell here. And devices usually start around $35. Then the agent will place the order once they has received the full customer payment. And they do this order by text and the order payment via mobile money to the customer to Copia HQ. And Copia then can deliver the phone to the agents within 2 days if you're in a peri-urban area, or within a week if you're in the rural area. And by doing this, the customer will receive a delivery message to the current handset from Copia, and then they can go to the agent and they collect the new smartphone. So Copia now has around 1,200 agents and 100,000 customers, and they have been able to eliminate the consumer's cost of time and travel to acquire the phone, and also managed to reduce the rural price on smartphones, which are usually higher in remote towns than in cities like Nairobi due to the inefficient supply chains. And what has also proved quite valuable for customers is the option to buy the smartphones on a layaway plan. So they can save money with a Copia agent locally until they have enough to buying the phone. To further increase impact though, Copia is looking into introducing additional financial products like loans and to provide customers with basic digital literacy training. It was also mentioned that they could benefit from having agents with example models of the devices. And in this way, they can demonstrate to consumers and they can see and touch the devices before they will commit to buying them. And this could all help to ensure the maximum uptake and use of the smartphones. So our second case study is from Rwanda. And it's an example of an asset financing business model. Here, the solar energy home system provider Mobisol collaborates with MTN and Tecnomobile to enable access to smartphone loans for low-income and off-grid populations. So since March last year, they offer new and existing Mobisol customers a loan to purchase a Tecno smartphone, the W2 model, bundled with a solar home system. And MTN provides free data bundles over the 18 to 36 months of the loan repayment to customers who are registered on their network through Mobisol. And what's particularly interesting is Mobisol's alternative approach of building customer or to assessing credit histories. They build a customer credit profile through multiple data points and existing customers' previous smart solar home system repayments. And this enables the product to be offered to unbanked consumers who normally wouldn't be able to support, who normally wouldn't get financial service provider support. So for example, Mobisol used data points from family size, household income and expenditures, and land size to build a credit profile for an individual. And this is then further augmented by data collected over time on customer demographics and purchasing history, which all helps to build benchmarks around specific customer segments. The scheme also takes into account customer seasonal income flows by offering flexible repayment terms. and the consumer's total ongoing costs for using the phones are addressed through the free data bundle, and also the usage of the solar home system, which will make charging your battery device a bit more affordable. But in order to further propel the success of the program, customers mentioned that they would like local content on the smartphones. So for example, it could be apps in their local language and some training in how to use the device and how to get online. And it was also mentioned that the limited offer with just one techno handset could be expanded to a wider range to have more of a selection from a customer point of view. So our third and final case study is from Tamilnadu in India. And this is an example of the asset financing model through a partnership between Vodafone India and the microfinance NGO Hand in Hand. Their program Smart Snahidi offers smartphone loans to rural female micro-entrepreneurs who are already members of Hand in Hand's savings groups. And the women's creditworthiness for the loan is validated through the savings group credit history. And the end users will then get a smartphone bundled with a Vodafone SIM and a benefit package. And this package contains free internet use for a year with 200 megabytes of data every month. And they get pre-installed relevant apps and 50% off any additional data that they buy. Plus, they get free talk time every time they top up a certain data amount. The repayment period varies, but it's usually around 10 to 12 months, with repayments around $10 every month. So in the first 4 months of this program, between January to April last year when we was tracking the case, around 2,000 women had taken up the smartphone loan across 3 districts of Tamil Nadu. And Vodafone India reported a very positive 30% increase in ARPU for the enrolled users. But what we found particularly interesting about the Smart Snahidi program is its success in addressing multiple access and use barriers at the same time. So beyond enabling users to afford the smartphone itself and the ongoing data costs, they also train the customers in digital skills and in beneficial internet use cases, and they teach them methods of using the smartphones for scaling up their micro businesses. So in this way, they provide a clear business use case, which helps women to justify their smartphone ownership, as it supports them increasing the household income, and it gives them the skills confidence to use their new smartphones for themselves and not pass them on to the male family members, which otherwise is a quite common occurrence in India due to social norms. So something we found when we talked to Smart Snahidi customers was that it would be even more useful to receive this training as soon as possible after they receive their new phones, and to keep up the training regularly to further improve the value that customers could realize with the new handsets. So our research findings informed a set of key recommendations. The 3 strategies that stood out above the others was for enhancing your smartphone affordability with these. So it's about making the purchasing price more manageable through financing and ensuring efficient distribution channels are in place, and then localizing devices to reflect market demands. So when it comes to financing, it's about enabling consumers' ability to buy smartphones on credit or to save towards the handset, and also to take into account the seasonal income flow of consumers, so you can have some flexibility perhaps in your payment scheme. And for efficient distribution, as mentioned, it could be an idea to partner with rural agent networks if you have a large rural customer base. And in this respect, it's good to also identify and sell the devices through channels that people trust. So it could be a local brand, a local NGO, or the local kiosks where consumers are already comfortable with the people there. And this can be especially useful if it's a novice smartphone user or they have never used the internet before. So that way they can get some training and some trust inbuilt there as well. When it comes to localizing devices, what we want to get across here is the opportunity that you can tailor the phone with a specific market in mind. Because as we know, smartphones are really usually designed with the more mature markets in mind. So, but maybe the more expensive features are inbuilt, such as NFC or connected home integration, isn't as relevant for the emerging market context. if you compare to battery, longevity, or having a decent camera. And players such as Technomobile has really realized this, and they've been quite successful both as a manufacturer and distributor in Africa. And then there's also a chance to improve the value perception of the handsets by tailoring them with locally relevant bundles or offers. So for example, if you're targeting a rural customer base with farmers, it could be an idea to sell the device with a quite inexpensive dust cover, which can be useful, or you can sell the device with an insurance policy against water damage. And then finally, if you're aware that your customer base have some misconceptions of smartphone price, it can be quite a quick win and inexpensive way to just have a marketing campaign to educate customers about the real cost of handsets and explain that even if you might sell more affordable, lower end smartphones, it can still be good value and really quality to people's lives. So the last thing I wanted to mention here is that in the back pages of our report, we have a checklist with some more practical considerations for how we can maximize the impact of your program if you do wish to make a smartphone affordability program. And these have some points around partnerships or marketing, or how to facilitate your sales agents to better sell towards novice smartphone users. So yeah, this wraps up my presentation, and I believe we have quite some time to have some Q&A as well. Do we, Hibak?
Thank you, Madeline. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now for around 20 minutes. We also have Helen Croxon and Jonathan Vesey in the room to also provide their expertise. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question and answer box shown on the right-hand side of your screen. So it looks like we have a few questions. The first question is, do you have any examples of initiatives from the third type of business models that was discussed in more detail, such as the third-party payment models?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Maybe just to recap, so the third-party payment models is the module that we didn't discuss in depth, but it's where the smartphone cost is subsidized or offset by a third party, like governments, non-profits, or private companies. So an example from a government point of view is where Argentina wanted to support the ICT transformation policies. So here the president launched a program where I think around 8 million individuals were able to move from 2G feature phones to 4G phones, and the total price of the phone came up to around $138, but they were able to break this down by financing. And maybe a private sector example could be Social Echo, the $1 smartphone you might have heard about. So this builds on a advertising subsidization model where the self-branded smartphones come with a preloaded advertising application. And here they can generate funding from content providers to sponsor the $49 of the handset. And it can also feature and advertise the content on the handset. So in this way, the target low income and end users would only pay $1 for the new phone. So these are two examples, but in the report you can find some more.
Thank you for that, Madeline. We've received another question. Smartphone prices have been falling quickly over recent years. Is smartphone affordability therefore not an issue that will solve itself, and we should therefore prioritize other barriers to digital inclusion?
Well, it's very true that smartphone prices have been falling, but we also know that despite the price decline, smartphone cost in relation to income levels continue to constrain universal access. So I guess the question then becomes, how long would we need to wait before the prices would reach an affordable level? If you take Kenya, for example, I think the smartphone price last year was around €118 on average, and by 2020 it's only supposed to drop until $109 more or less. So considering a cost threshold of lower income is around $15 to $35 in order to be affordable. We're quite a long way before we can hit an affordable price point. Anything to add?
I think the other issue is that actually components for smartphones in some ways are becoming increasingly expensive. So smartphones develop and they get more sophisticated screens. These are things where the raw materials that are going into the smartphone become more expensive. So while one always assumes technology is going to get cheaper, it is not always the case. And what we've got to encourage is the production and packaging of many more simplified handsets, as Maddie referred to at the end, that allow the costs to be lower.
I could also add one more comment from a relevance of the cost price of a handset. Prices can continue to drop, but ultimately you still need a device that's fit for purpose. So the more you strip down on, particularly on memory and processor capability, the experience for the end user becomes unusable. And as we referred to earlier, applications and services are being developed often at the high end. So you have to be mindful of actually how usable the end device is going to become when you start to strip those costs down, because it will have an impact on the performance of the device itself, whether the screen is freezing, whether they have enough memory on board, and whether the handset is actually capable of delivering the user experience that you would expect from higher end handsets. And just to comment again on the point that Helen made, certain components are actually going up in price, particularly in recent times. We've seen the price of batteries, for example, going up due to more components and sourcing.
Thank you for that. And another question that we've received is, what measures are put into place if customers do not pay?
I can give an example. There are software developers now out there that can offer what we refer to as kill switch technologies. They've been around for some years, and you see them being deployed in other electronic components such as solar home systems. Now, what this will enable is the device to be completely shut down at the chipset level, so very difficult for a device to be hacked, and that would render the phone useless. Now, the challenge that then offers is how do you get a return on your risk if you're the person that's subsidizing or putting the device on a call plan? That is obviously more tricky. I guess retrieving those assets would still need a physical contact with the end user. So one of the case studies, or a couple of the case studies we referred to in our report, is find control user groups, and employers are often a very good example of that, where an employee is less likely to default on a payment plan if it's coming directly from the payroll that's being provided by their employer, or if they're part of a union, or if they're a part of a consortium where obviously they have a longer ongoing relationship with that organisation, such as a farmers union or an employers union that they can obviously be tracked with. So in terms of asset financing, two examples we can give is using either the technology to render the device useless, so it incentivizes the user to get back in credit, or to be tied in with an ongoing relationship, particularly at employer level, or otherwise where there is an ongoing relationship, they need to get back into credit, or they can recover the asset through a payroll scheme.
Do you also see a role for donors to get involved in this space? How could they support these types of initiatives?
Well, this will be an interesting area to explore. One route could be maybe donor finance backing for device loans. They're offered to low-income populations. Maybe this financing would allow for more testing of new alternative credit scoring methods. So the donor fundings of new trials, for example, and alternative loan schemes, it could really try the new but not tested methods yet. And it can also offset the risk that actors face, and maybe encourage them to have more confidence to explore new routes and partnerships. But yeah, it's an interesting area to explore, which would be nice to talk more about.
I think just as a general comment, as a personal view, I think it's difficult for donors to get into any sort of subsidy model because of the risk factor. I mean, at the end of the day, smartphones are very liquidable assets. They can be immediately resold, they can be transferred across borders, they can be moved within family units. So I think at this, from all the feedback we've had, naturally donors are quite hesitant about putting subsidy or putting sort of cash incentives in place to try and reduce the cost. I think it's the methodology that should be funded, and trying to set up schemes that will take some investment just to get the scheme set up. But once you've got them in a place where you minimise the risk of default payment or the asset going missing, and it's very easy for assets to go missing in the smartphones, that would probably be the better place for them to put their investment.
Thank you for that. It looks as if we're getting quite a few questions. So the next question is, have you looked at the different methods companies use to assess low-income customers' ability to pay, especially with asset financing? What do you consider good practice, and are there standards that regulate companies?
So what we have are, for example, the examples of the Mobisols and other solar home system providers who have been able to use the demographics and to collate multiple data points of land size and demographics, and then combine that with the previous history of credit that they have from loan repayments of the solar home systems. And by mixing this, they got quite a good benchmark of the customer segment. But in terms of standards and things, personally, I'm not aware of there being such. I know there's some interesting initiatives of looking into more social network data and so forth. I think it's a company called Paymax in China, which looks into this. They're quite a wide reach of different customer information by tracking online activity and so forth. Some might think this is quite a questionable way of doing this when it comes to privacy. But yes, it's definitely something interesting to explore further, I think, if you want to develop these kind of initiatives and open up the space for more unbanked and lower income populations.
Yeah, I think I would echo the point that the example that we've seen on the closest we've seen to credit scoring is probably using other companies that have an interest in this space, particularly utility companies, because the asset is obviously being tied to a fixed residential address. The user would have to use some form of ID card or some sort of permanent resident status to get the initial asset, which is quite an expensive solar home system, for example. Once that's in place, you've got a pattern then of regular payment. You've got a proof that there is no default on that payment, and ability to pay is being monitored. And I think a good example to add to that is when there's a partnership with mobile money platforms, and they can see that there is a fixed amount of income coming into the house, either on a weekly or monthly basis or otherwise, that you can probably do some analysis on that, the two, to work out where there is room for disposable income and what's left at the end of a period, whether it's a weekly pay run or a monthly pay run, whatever's being provided to the household to cover that household bills. If there is room for further subsidy, or sorry, not subsidy, further room for financing on something like a device plus an airtime allowance. If you spread that over a 24-month period, the payment becomes quite low. And actually, for an operator, it becomes interesting because you could actually take an exclusive use of airtime, where you're not having multi-SIM environments where the customer is incentivized to have a fixed amount of data per month or per week from a single operator on a recurring payment plan. It's actually a very good long-term model for the operator because of multi-SIM usage in the market. So we think that's an example of credit scoring done in an informal way, because there's no formalized credit score systems in a lot of these rural areas.
Yeah, and I think an additional point might be how mobile operators who have mobile money services, they have potential to really look into the credit history or the history of the transactions of the customers to create profiles based on this. So it's an opportunity at the fingertips of many operators that they can explore further.
Thank you, Madeleine. So the next question that we have is, in terms of the gender dimension of affordable smartphone ownership, did any model stand out as accelerating women's ownership in particular?
Well, we have the one we presented here before of Vodafone India in Tamilnadu. It was a good way where they really acknowledged the users and adoption barriers that women face. And it's a model that I think when you design to women, it shouldn't just be directed to women, but to take the wider context into account. So what Vodafone and Hand in Hand was doing is that they designed the offer so it would be appealing for the whole of the family, so that the head of the household, if it's her husband or male relative, would also see the benefits of using the phone. I'm not sure, there might be some more examples.
I think one of the points when you look at the gender dimensions is you have to look at it on a local country by country basis, because there can be, as Maddie inferred there, so many social norms that impact on women's smartphone ownership. I think in general, a lot of the ones that are very specific for women, for example, there's another case study in the report, which is based in India, and it's a company called Sonata that offers loans to women for handsets. I think a lot of these examples are great examples, but what we would question is how scalable some of them are. And so ultimately, I think we need to look at models which make smartphones affordable on a wide basis, and make sure that the way they're communicated and targeted is tailored to be very inclusive of women. And I think that's what needs to happen. I would say that we have come across lots of bits of research where women have been given handsets, and those handsets don't necessarily end up with the women. It is very common, as John said, handsets are something that are very transferable. And what we found through various pieces of research, I was talking to somebody who'd done some in Tanzania recently, was the churn in handset ownership. You know, things get tough, the handset gets sold. They found in this piece of research, particularly if there was a teenage son in the household, the woman would likely give her handset to that person, that son. So they're very transferable. So it's also very hard to measure actually the impact. So overall, I think we need to look at very scalable solutions that decrease the cost, and then make sure that it's designed and targeted in a way that makes it very accessible to women, also taking into account local context and social norms, and the need, as Maddie was saying, about targeting gatekeepers, which is what the Smart Shahidi offer was doing, was making it a practical reason for women to be allowed to have these phones.
For that, the next question we have is, where MNOs have partnered with smartphone providers, how do these providers convince MNOs? Because most rural customers will not continue buying talk time after they are done with payments.
Again, this is just a personal recommendation. If you look at the example we gave of solar home providers that clearly are required in deep rural areas because there's no local grid for power supply, most of these plans from the solar providers are actually over 2 years, depending on which solar provider they're using. So a 24-month payment plan, as long as it's tied to an airtime allowance, so you shouldn't just be asset financing a smartphone without an airtime mechanic to go with it, is where you would get the recurring airtime revenue. So I guess what I'm saying is, some have been done in the past where it's smartphone only, and I don't really see the value of that to an operator because people will or won't use airtime. But if you tie the two together, so it's kind of an out-of-the-box handset, you know, solar system plus handset plus airtime allowance on a recurring monthly payment, you do that through potentially through a solar pay-as-you-go provider, the opportunity for the operator is very, very strong, because as I said, you're going to get potentially an exclusive customer, whereas before you'd have had a multi-SIM user. And that would be a recommendation of how you could try and convince an MNO. Now, MNOs will always be hesitant in this space. MNOs, their view often is that there is still much more room for growth in urban areas where they've got higher value customers and higher ARPU in areas that they've already deployed their 3G and 4G networks. They need to get the return on investment there. So often we can sympathise with a commercial team and an operator that they would rather focus on how do they reach customers in those areas first before they then start thinking about rural. But in the case of rural, you've got the added benefit of people a little bit more traceable, given that if they're using a solar system, that has a longer term commitment, and that has an existing risk in the household that's attached to it. So it's something that could be a route to look at.
I think adding to that as well, it's not only about the offer itself, but also how you will go about and your approach to this. Because we know in rural areas, people often have lower digital skills and understanding of what you can get from the internet. So maybe that can be a reason for why we've seen lower usage after the payment is done. So it's about increasing the value perception, right? By doing more digital skills training, explaining what business uses you can get out of this, which might in time entice accelerated usage and more interest in keep using it. So if they feel they get more value add, that can entice future use as well.
Okay, another question that we've got is, did your research focus only on adults' access or also that of youth and children?
Yes, so the research focused on adults mainly, both women and men. We have not looked into children for research at all. But if you have any specific questions on this, please email, and who knows, maybe we'll be able to give you some examples and answer questions.
A lot of the models we were looking at involved asset financing. You know, obviously we've got a responsibility to make sure that we aren't encouraging behaviours that could lead children to get into issues of debt or inappropriate behaviour. So yes, we tend to focus on adults and driving smartphone affordability, but also other policies we focus on adults and driving adoption, digital inclusion, financial inclusion amongst the adult population.
Thank you, Madeline. Unfortunately, we've actually run out of time. Feel free to email us for more information, and the email address to contact us is displayed on the screen. You will also be receiving the link to this report after this session. Great. Thank you, everyone. We hope you found this an insightful session. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.